My name is Natalie, 33 years old, and a forensic accountant specializing in tracking down dirty money. Last week, my own mother kicked me out into the freezing rain because my younger sister blamed me for her impending divorce. My sister sobbed on the porch, playing the victim, while my father threw my luggage onto the driveway and told me I was worthless. I stood in the storm, said absolutely nothing, and calmly walked to my waiting car. They thought they had won. They had no idea I was already holding the match that would burn their lives down. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to use cold hard facts to destroy people who underestimated you. The sharp crack of polycarbonate echoing over the thunder was the sound that ended my relationship with my family. My silver suitcase hit the wet asphalt of my parents' circular driveway, bursting open upon impact. Silk blouses, tailored blazers, and expensive leather shoes spilled into the freezing Chicago rain. Every single item represented years of my hard work, yet they treated it like garbage. I stood motionless on the manicured front lawn, the icy downpour soaking through my wool trench coat, watching my belongings gather mud. Up on the grand porch of the house I grew up in, my sister Brittany was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She clutched her cashmere cardigan, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders heaving with theatrical sobs. "How could you do this to me, Natalie?" Brittany wailed, ensuring her voice was loud enough to carry over the storm. "How could you send those fake financial reports to DeAndre? You fabricated those spreadsheets to ruin me. You are so jealous of me taking a wealthy husband that you want to destroy my life." I stared up at her from the rain-swept driveway. DeAndre was her husband, a brilliant African-American real estate developer who built a downtown empire. He was a good man, and Brittany had been using him for years. But right now, Brittany was playing her favorite role, the innocent golden child. My father Richard stormed down the porch steps. His face was a mask of rage flushed red against the cold night air. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "Get off my property right now," my father screamed, the veins in his neck bulging. "You are a disgrace. You never fit into this family or our country club. You are just a bitter accountant who cannot stand to see her younger sister happy. You are so miserable in your own pathetic life that you have to fabricate lies to tear down Brittany and DeAndre." He kicked a pair of my heels further into a puddle. The contempt in his voice was not new to me. It was the exact same tone he used when I decided to study finance. He hated that I chose to be a forensic auditor tracking corporate fraud rather than spending my days at charity luncheons and spa appointments. My mother Catherine descended the stairs behind him. She marched straight up to me, her eyes narrowed with cold disgust. She stopped inches from my face. "You are a monster, Natalie," my mother said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I am ashamed that I gave birth to you." Without hesitation, my mother raised her hand and slapped me hard across the cheek. The impact stung sharply against my freezing skin. My head snapped sideways. The rain continued to pour, washing over the red mark I knew was rapidly forming on my face. Any other daughter might have broken down. Any normal person might have dropped to their knees or screamed at the sheer injustice. But I did not cry. My profession requires a mind devoid of emotion when assessing a hostile situation. As a forensic accountant, I deal in absolute facts ledgers and paper trails. Tears do not balance a spreadsheet, and they would not help me now. I slowly turned my face back to look at my mother. I kept my breathing steady. My expression remained completely blank. I reached down into the mud and picked up the only item that mattered to me, my encrypted work laptop. I wiped the rainwater off its casing and tucked it under my arm. I looked past my parents' locking eyes with Brittany, who had momentarily stopped her fake crying to gauge my reaction. She was waiting for me to shatter. I slowly gave her a chilling, completely empty smile instead. "I did not send DeAndre any reports yet," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any warmth. "I did not fabricate anything today. The numbers speak for themselves. But if you too want to blindly believe her crocodile tears, go right ahead. It is exactly like the time you drained my entire college savings account to buy Brittany a Porsche for her birthday because she cried about needing to fit in. Be my guest. Keep living in your comfortable delusion. My father stepped forward ready to hurl another insult, but glaring headlights cut through the darkness. My Uber pulled into the driveway, splashing through puddles. I did not bother picking up my clothes. The shoes were replaceable. The truth on my hard drive was not. I turned my back, ignoring my mother shouting about the will. I slid into the warm back seat, closed the door, and gave the driver my Chicago address. I watched the suburban streets fade into the night. Inside the quiet car, my analytical mind took over. I pulled out my phone and texted DeAndre. They took the bait. Brittany used me as her scapegoat. Initiate phase 2. DeAndre replied immediately. Thanks, Natalie. My legal team is locked and loaded. They will not know what hit them. I leaned back against the seat, finally allowing myself a small, satisfied smirk. The driver navigated toward downtown Chicago while I stared out the rain-streaked window. My cheek still throbbed from my mother's slap, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the sharp clarity settling over my mind. For 33 years, I played the dutiful daughter who never measured up to the family standard. They saw my practical clothes, my long working hours, and my single status as a tragedy. They looked at my career in forensic accounting as boring and unglamorous. They failed to understand that hunting down hidden assets and destroying white-collar criminals had turned me into an apex predator. My phone vibrated again in my lap. It was another text from DeAndre. He asked if I was safe and needed a private car. I typed back a quick reassurance. DeAndre was a good man. He was a self-made African-American entrepreneur who had built his commercial real estate empire from the ground up. He possessed a brilliant mind and a calm presence that demanded respect in every boardroom. When Brittany introduced him 3 years ago, my parents were hesitant, masking their prejudices behind fake smiles. But realizing his net worth was in the 9 figures, they paraded him around their country club like a trophy. Brittany had played the role of the devoted progressive wife perfectly. She loved the penthouses, the gala events, and the unlimited black card he provided. She loved the status of being married to a prominent developer, but she never actually loved the man. Our secret alliance had formed exactly 1 month ago. DeAndre had invited me to a discreet lunch near the financial district. He did not come to me making small talk. He came to me as a businessman who knew exactly what my job title meant. He had noticed minor discrepancies in the accounting of a new commercial development project his firm was launching. The numbers were small, at first resembling administrative errors, but DeAndre had sharp instincts. He knew Brittany had access to those specific accounts for her boutique business expenses. Instead of confronting her without proof, he asked me to run a shadow audit. He handed me a flash drive containing months of financial ledgers and said he needed the absolute truth no matter how much it might hurt the family. I agreed immediately. Not because I wanted to ruin my sister, but because numbers do not lie. I spent 3 weeks digging through the digital mud. What I found was not just a minor discrepancy. It was a massive, highly coordinated embezzlement scheme. Brittany had not just skimmed a little off the top for designer bags. She was bleeding his company dry. But the real gut punch came when I traced where that stolen money was going. It was not going to offshore accounts or vacations. It was going directly into my parents' joint checking accounts. Sitting in the back of the Uber, I let out a dry, humorless laugh. My parents, the same people who just kicked me out into the rain for supposedly tarnishing the family name, were entirely bankrupt. Their generational wealth had dried up years ago. Their country club fees, their luxury leased vehicles, and the mortgage on that massive suburban mansion were all being paid for with money Brittany was actively stealing from her husband. They were completely complicit. And to cover her tracks, Brittany had been leaving a breadcrumb trail of fake emails suggesting that I was the one advising her on these financial moves. She thought that because I was the accountant in the family making me the mastermind would throw DeAndre off her scent. She underestimated my skills, and she completely underestimated her husband. DeAndre did not confront her right away. We formulated a plan. We needed them to feel confident, to feel untouchable, and to fully commit to their lies. Tonight was the catalyst. Brittany knew DeAndre was getting suspicious, so she preemptively struck, running to our parents, crying that I was trying to frame her. She manipulated them into kicking me out, thinking that discrediting me would invalidate any audit I produced. She thought she was playing chess, but she was barely playing checkers. The city skyline loomed ahead, a fortress of glass and steel cutting through the storm. I watched the glowing lights of the skyscrapers and felt a profound sense of liberation. My mother slapping me was the final severing of any lingering guilt I might have harbored. They had shown me their true colors. They chose the golden child, the thief, over the daughter who actually worked for a living. They chose the illusion of wealth over basic human decency. They chose to be criminals. The car pulled up to my high-rise condo building in the Loop. I thanked the driver, stepped out of the vehicle, and walked past the doorman into the warm, quiet lobby. I took the elevator to the 32nd floor, letting the exhaustion wash over me, but there was no time to sleep. I unlocked my door, dropped my damp coat on a chair, and walked straight to my home office. I set my encrypted laptop on the desk and plugged it in. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the dark room. I opened the secure folder containing the final unredacted forensic report. It was a masterpiece of financial tracking. Every stolen dollar, every forged signature, every routed wire transfer was documented, time-stamped, and legally verified. I reviewed the summary one last time to ensure absolute perfection. Tomorrow morning, the real war would begin. I was not just going to hand this report over to DeAndre. We were going to the office of the most ruthless corporate litigator in Chicago. My family thought they had successfully disposed of the scapegoat. They did not realize they had just given the executioner permission to strike. I picked up my phone and set an alarm for 6 in the morning. Phase 2 was officially underway. The morning sun reflected harshly off the glass and steel skyscrapers of downtown Chicago, casting sharp shadows across the pavement. I walked into the lobby of the prestigious law firm with my encrypted laptop tucked securely under my arm. The building reeked of power and expensive cologne. I bypassed the receptionist with a brief nod and took the private elevator straight to the top floor. This was the domain of Oliver, one of the most ruthless and effective corporate litigators in the state. He did not handle standard divorces. He handled corporate warfare, and that was exactly what my sister had initiated. When the elevator doors parted, DeAndre was already waiting for me in the executive conference room. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city he helped build. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, looking every bit the formidable magnate he was. Despite the betrayal he was facing, his posture was rigid, his expression unreadable. DeAndre did not break down, he strategized. Oliver sat at the head of the massive mahogany table. He was a shark of a man in his early 40s, with sharp features and piercing gray eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He gestured for me to take the seat across from him. "Good morning, Natalie," Oliver said, his voice smooth and commanding. "DeAndre tells me you had quite an eventful evening with your family." "You could say that," I replied, taking my seat and opening my laptop. "I was officially evicted from the Addams family. My mother slapped me. My father cursed my existence, and Brittany played the weeping victim to perfection." DeAndre turned away from the window and took the seat next to me. "I am sorry you had to endure that, Natalie. I never wanted you to be the collateral damage in my marriage." "I am not collateral damage," I corrected him, meeting his gaze. "I am the asset they foolishly discarded. Let us get to work." I connected my laptop to the conference room screen and brought up the final forensic audit. The spreadsheets and flowcharts illuminated the dim room with cold, hard facts. I slid a secure flash drive across the table to Oliver. "Here is the unredacted report," I said. Every transaction, every dummy corporation, and every offshore wire transfer is documented and legally verified. Brittany was arrogant, but she was also incredibly sloppy. Oliver plugged the drive into his tablet, and his eyes scanned the data with practiced speed. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. This is exceptional work, Natalie. I have seen entire teams of forensic auditors take months to compile what you did in 3 weeks. You have handed us a loaded weapon. Let us talk about the total damage, DeAndre said, leaning forward and resting his hands on the table. I pulled up the primary ledger on the main screen. Over the past 14 months, Brittany has systematically embezzled exactly $450,000 from your commercial development accounts. She used her access to your lifestyle boutique subsidiary to create fake vendor invoices. She authorized payments to shell companies that she secretly controlled. DeAndre let out a slow breath, shaking his head. $450,000. She stole nearly $500,000 right under my nose while smiling at me across the dinner table every night. And that is not all she was doing behind your back, Oliver added, sliding a thin manila folder toward DeAndre. My private investigators finalized their report this morning. We have definitive proof of the infidelity. DeAndre did not even open the folder. He just stared at it. The personal trainer, he stated. Yes, Oliver confirmed. She has been sleeping with him for the better part of a year. They frequent high-end hotels downtown, all paid for using the corporate credit card you issued her for business expenses. We have photographs, hotel receipts, and eyewitness testimonies. It is an airtight case for fault in the divorce proceedings. For a brief second, I saw a flash of genuine pain in DeAndre's eyes. He had loved my sister. He had given her the world, elevated her status, and trusted her completely. But the pain vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. I can survive a cheating wife, DeAndre said, his voice dropping an octave. Marriages fail. People make mistakes. But the financial betrayal is unforgivable. She used my company as her personal piggy bank and tried to frame you for it, Natalie. That crosses a line I cannot ignore. She needed a scapegoat, I explained, pointing to the screen. Once she realized you were reviewing the quarterly reports, she panicked. She knew she could not hide the missing funds forever. By staging that dramatic confrontation last night, she hoped to discredit me. She thought if she convinced my parents I was a jealous, vindictive sister trying to ruin her marriage, you would never believe my audit. Oliver chuckled darkly. It is a classic misdirection tactic, but poorly executed. She assumed we would react emotionally. Instead, we are responding methodically. So what is our legal strategy? I asked, looking at Oliver. We do not just file for divorce, Oliver said, leaning back in his leather chair. If we hit her with the embezzlement charges right now, she will play the victim. She will hire a high-profile defense attorney, claim she was entitled to the money as your wife, and drag this out in civil court for years. She will drain your resources and make it a public spectacle. I will not let her drag my company through the mud, DeAndre stated firmly. I have investors and board members to answer to. Exactly, Oliver agreed. Which is why we are going to let her think she is winning. We proceed with the divorce mediation. We let her make her outrageous demands. We let her think she has you backed into a corner because of the cheating, assuming you want to avoid a public scandal. I looked at the data on the screen, piecing together the strategy. We let her greed trap her. Precisely, Oliver said. We use the stolen $450,000 as leverage, but we do not reveal we know about it yet. We guide her toward a specific settlement, a settlement that looks like a massive victory for her, but is actually a financial death sentence. I pulled up the secondary file I had uncovered. The offshore accounts. Brittany did not keep the money. She funneled it to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands and then routed it right back into the United States. Where did it go? DeAndre asked, his eyes narrowing. I clicked a button and the screen displayed the final destination of the stolen funds. It went to Richard and Catherine Adams, my parents. DeAndre stared at the screen in absolute disbelief. Your parents. They took the money. They needed it, I said, my voice devoid of pity. Their country club lifestyle is a complete facade. They are drowning in debt, and the IRS was threatening to seize their mansion. Brittany stole your money to bail them out. They are entirely complicit in the embezzlement. Oliver clasped his hands together. Perfect. We do not just have Brittany. We have the entire family in a financial vice. DeAndre looked at me. They threw you out in the rain to protect this secret. Yes, they did, I replied. Then we burn it all down. DeAndre said, his voice cold as steel. Oliver, prepare the mediation documents. Natalie, get ready. We are going to give Brittany exactly what she wants. I nodded at DeAndre, my fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard to pull up the next series of slides on the conference room monitor. The screen transitioned from the broad overview of the embezzlement to a highly detailed flowchart mapping the precise movement of the stolen capital. If we were going to trap Brittany and my parents in their own greed, DeAndre and Oliver needed to understand exactly how the money laundering machine operated. I stood up and walked toward the screen, switching fully into my role as a forensic auditor. The methodology Brittany used is known as fraudulent disbursement. Through billing schemes, I began pointing to the first cluster of data points. When you gave her executive oversight of the lifestyle boutique subsidiary, you granted her authorization to approve accounts payable. She exploited that trust by creating 4 separate phantom vendors. These were shell companies registered in Delaware, a state known for corporate anonymity. She generated fake invoices for services that were never rendered: marketing consultations, inventory logistics, and brand management fees. DeAndre stared at the fraudulent invoices displayed on the screen. The amounts were carefully calculated. He noted, his voice remarkably steady for a man dissecting his own financial betrayal. None of these individual payments exceed the threshold that would normally trigger an automatic secondary review from my accounting department. She kept every invoice just under $25,000. Exactly, I confirmed. It is a textbook layering technique. She bled the accounts slowly over 14 months to avoid setting off internal alarms. But stealing the money was only the first phase. The real crime was how she washed it. I tapped the remote, and the flowchart expanded, showing international wire routing numbers. The Delaware shell companies funneled the capital to a numbered account in the Cayman Islands. This was meant to break the paper trail. In traditional money laundering, this is the layering phase. She wanted to create a jurisdictional barrier that would discourage a standard audit. But once the money was offshore, it did not stay there. Oliver leaned forward, his sharp eyes following the red lines on the screen. She repatriated the funds. Where did the integration phase occur? She brought it back on shore into a domestic, irrevocable trust, I explained, highlighting the final destination on the map. The primary beneficiaries of that trust are Richard and Catherine Adams, my parents. The room fell completely silent as the reality of the situation settled over the table. My parents were not just passive recipients of a few stolen gifts. They were the ultimate destination for $500,000 of embezzled corporate capital. DeAndre crossed his arms, his jaw clenched tight. Your parents always acted like they possessed generational wealth. They looked down their noses at me because I built my company from the ground up, while they supposedly inherited their status. Why would they need Brittany to steal for them? Because their entire life is a heavily leveraged illusion, I said, bringing up a new document. I pulled their public financial records and cross-referenced them with the trust deposits. My parents are completely broke. Their wealth dried up nearly a decade ago when my father made a series of catastrophic investments in commercial retail spaces that went bankrupt. Instead of downsizing and admitting their financial failure, they maintained their country club memberships, leased luxury vehicles, and kept up appearances using debt. They took out multiple home equity lines of credit on their suburban mansion until the property was underwater. But the debt was not their biggest problem. I magnified a section of the document featuring official federal letterhead. 2 years ago, the Internal Revenue Service hit them with massive federal tax liens for years of unpaid taxes and penalties. They owed the federal government over $300,000. The IRS was preparing to seize their assets, including the house. They were weeks away from total financial ruin and public humiliation. Brittany could not let that happen. I continued, my voice devoid of any sympathy. Her entire identity is tied to being the wealthy, perfect daughter of a prominent family. If her parents were exposed as bankrupt frauds and evicted from their mansion, her social standing would shatter. So she used her position in your company to bail them out. The offshore money was routed to the domestic trust, and from there it went directly to the IRS to satisfy the tax liens. The remaining funds were used to catch up on their defaulted mortgage payments. Your commercial real estate firm effectively paid off my parents' federal tax debts and saved their home from foreclosure. DeAndre let out a sharp, bitter laugh. I bought their house, I paid their taxes, and last night they stood on the porch of the home I secretly saved and kicked you out into the rain because you were supposedly not good enough for their family. The sheer audacity is staggering. It goes beyond audacity, Oliver stated, writing rapidly on his legal pad. This is a coordinated criminal conspiracy. Richard and Catherine Adams knowingly received stolen funds. Ignorance is not a defense here, especially since the money was routed through a complex offshore structure before hitting their trust. They are guilty of receiving stolen property and tax evasion, considering they certainly did not declare this embezzled influx of cash as income. And Brittany committed corporate fraud, embezzlement, and wire fraud. We have enough evidence to send your entire family to federal prison, Natalie. I closed my laptop and returned to my seat. I know we do, but sending them to prison right now is too quick. They need to feel the loss of their status first. They need to experience the absolute destruction of their fake wealth. If we drop the evidence on them today, they will play the victim to their social circle. They will claim a misunderstanding. We need to trap them in a corner where there is no escape and no one to blame but themselves. Oliver nodded slowly, his gray eyes gleaming with dangerous approval. You want to give them enough rope to hang themselves, he said. I like the way you operate, Natalie. DeAndre stood up from the table, buttoning his suit jacket. We execute the plan exactly as discussed, he commanded. Let them think they have outsmarted us. Let them celebrate. I will play the devastated husband. And you, Natalie, will continue playing the outcast daughter. We reconvene when the trap is fully set. I left the law firm feeling an icy sense of purpose. The rain from the previous night had cleared, leaving the city air crisp and biting. I walked back to my condo, my mind organizing the next steps of our corporate siege. I knew my mother and sister would not just sit idly by. They needed to control the narrative. They needed to ensure that if I tried to warn anyone about the embezzlement, my credibility would already be completely destroyed. I expected a smear campaign. I just did not realize how quickly they would launch it. The following morning, I stood in my kitchen, the sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The espresso machine hummed, filling the room with the rich aroma of dark roast coffee. I poured the shot into a small ceramic cup and walked over to my kitchen island. I picked up my phone, noticing a dozen notifications from extended family members I had not spoken to in years. My cousin Brenda had sent a message consisting entirely of angry emojis. My Aunt Patricia had left a voicemail saying she was praying for my troubled soul. I opened Facebook. My mother had been busy. At 6 a.m, Catherine Adams had published a public essay to her timeline. It was a masterclass in suburban manipulation, tailored perfectly for her audience of country club wives and neighborhood gossips. She had even attached a carefully selected photograph of herself and Brittany, looking mournful but resilient, in matching cashmere sweaters. I took a sip of my espresso and began to read the digital assassination of my character. It is with a heavy heart that I must share a painful family tragedy, my mother wrote. As many of you know, my husband and I have always supported our daughters unconditionally. We have given them every advantage, every ounce of our love. But sometimes, despite a mother's best efforts, darkness takes root in a child's heart. Last night, we had to make the excruciating decision to ask our eldest daughter, Natalie, to leave our home. For months, she has harbored a toxic, deeply unsettling jealousy toward her younger sister. Brittany has built a beautiful life and a loving marriage, things that Natalie unfortunately lacks. Instead of seeking professional help for her bitterness, Natalie attempted to destroy her sister's happiness. She fabricated malicious lies and fake financial rumors to tear apart Brittany's marriage. We are heartbroken, but we must protect our family from her vindictive behavior. Please keep us in your thoughts during this devastating time. I set my coffee cup down. The post already had over 400 likes and 80 comments. The local suburban echo chamber was eating it up. These were people who lived for neighborhood drama, who weaponized passive aggression at charity galas and tennis matches. They immediately rallied behind the grieving mother and the supposedly victimized sister. I scrolled through the comment section, my face completely devoid of emotion. A woman named Susan, who regularly played doubles tennis with my mother, wrote, "I am so sorry, Catherine. You are a wonderful mother. Do not let her toxic energy drag your beautiful family down." Another woman, a real estate broker who frequently attended their holiday parties, chimed in, sending prayers. It is so sad when unmarried women let their jealousy turn into pure evil. Stay strong, Brittany. Even my Uncle Gregory commented, claiming he always knew there was something fundamentally wrong with me since childhood. They called me a monster. They called me unstable. They suggested I be institutionalized. They speculated about my career, claiming my accounting firm must be ashamed to employ someone so mentally unwell. My mother replied to several of the comments, thanking them for their support, playing the role of the dignified matriarch, holding her family together through a storm of my making. A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have desperately typed out a lengthy rebuttal defending their honor, screaming into the digital void that it was all a lie. They would have tried to explain the offshore accounts, the forged invoices, and the stolen $450,000. I did not type a single word in my defense. I did not shed a tear over my ruined reputation among a group of hypocrites I actively despised. Instead, I pressed the volume and power buttons on my phone simultaneously. Click, screenshot saved. I scrolled down, capturing every single comment, every reply my mother made, and every accusation leveled against my professional integrity. Click, click, click. I uploaded the images directly to my encrypted cloud storage, dropping them into a newly created folder labeled Defamation Evidence. My mother thought she was winning the public relations war. She thought she was isolating me and securing her false narrative. From a legal standpoint, she had just handed me a golden ticket. By publicly accusing me of fabricating financial documents and questioning my professional competence, she had committed textbook libel. She was actively harming my reputation as a certified public accountant and forensic auditor. In the state of Illinois, defamation that attacks a person's professional integrity is considered defamation per se. I did not even have to prove actual damages to win a substantial financial settlement. She was digging her own grave, and she was broadcasting the excavation live to all her friends. I took another calm sip of my espresso, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. The coffee tasted exceptionally good this morning. Let them talk now. My peaceful morning routine was shattered by the sharp ringing of my work cell phone. I glanced at the caller identification flashing across the screen. It was my father, Richard Adams. He rarely called me, and he almost certainly never called my dedicated corporate line. He only possessed this number because he had demanded it years ago for emergencies, a privilege he usually ignored. I knew exactly why he was calling now. The social media smear campaign was only the first wave of their attack. Now came the intimidation phase. Before answering, I tapped a button on my screen to activate the call recording software. As a forensic accountant dealing with financial crimes, all my corporate communications were monitored and recorded for compliance purposes. When the line connected, an automated voice distinctly announced that the call was being recorded. My father was too enraged to care. "Listen to me very carefully, you incredibly ungrateful little brat," my father hissed loudly through the speaker. His voice was tight with a rage I had not heard since the night I chose my accounting major over law school. You have caused enough damage to this family. You are going to fix the mess you made with DeAndre right now. I kept my tone perfectly neutral, devoid of any emotional reaction. Good morning, Richard. What exactly am I supposed to fix? Do not play coy with me, Natalie, he barked. Brittany is an absolute wreck. DeAndre is talking about bringing in his own auditors because of the lies you fed him. You terrified your sister, and you are jeopardizing her entire divorce settlement. She rightfully deserves half of absolutely everything that man owns, and I will not let your petty jealousy cost her millions. I leaned against the kitchen island, staring out at the Chicago skyline. DeAndre is conducting his own business affairs, I said smoothly. I have nothing to do with his personal decisions regarding his marriage or his corporate finances. That is a blatant lie, my father shouted. We know you fed him fake numbers. You manipulated spreadsheets to make it look like Brittany was mismanaging the boutique funds. You tried to frame her because you cannot stand that she secured a wealthy husband while you sit alone in a sterile apartment crunching numbers. I smiled at the irony. He genuinely believed his own narrative. What is it you want, Richard? I asked deliberately, using his first name to establish distance. I want a signed admission of guilt, he demanded, laying out his terms. My lawyer is drafting a non-disclosure agreement and a formal confession. You are going to sign a legally binding document stating that you completely fabricated the financial discrepancies out of personal malice. You will state that Brittany never touched a single cent of DeAndre's hard-earned money inappropriately. You will sign the NDA, promising never to discuss her boutique business or her marriage with anyone ever again. And why would I sign a document falsely confessing to professional misconduct? I asked, letting a trace of feigned hesitation creep into my voice. Because if you do not sign it by tomorrow morning, I am calling the managing partners at your prestigious firm, my father sneered. I have friends in high places in Chicago, Natalie. I play golf with men who sit on corporate boards. I will personally call your bosses and tell them you have a history of forging financial documents to ruin personal enemies. I will tell them you are mentally unstable and vindictive. I tapped my fingernail against the marble countertop. So you are going to call my employers and lie about my professional integrity. I will do much more than just that. He continued, his misplaced confidence swelling. I will file a formal complaint with the state licensing board. I will accuse you of gross ethical violations and document forgery. I will spend every ounce of my influence to ensure your certified public accountant license is permanently revoked. You will never work in the financial sector again. You will be completely ruined. I needed the extortion parameters perfectly boxed in. I want to make sure I completely understand your terms, Richard. You are stating that if I do not sign a false confession and a non-disclosure agreement to protect Brittany's divorce settlement, you will intentionally launch a campaign to destroy my career, get me fired, and revoke my professional license. Is that correct? That is exactly what I am saying. He confirmed, his voice dripping with malice. You will sign the papers, Natalie. You will take the fall. You owe this family. You will save your sister's settlement, or I will personally ensure you end up bankrupt and unemployable. The courier will deliver the documents to your lobby by noon. Sign them today. He abruptly ended the call with a very sharp click. The line went completely dead. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. I did not feel intimidated. I did not feel afraid. I felt an overwhelming sense of professional triumph. My father, in his arrogant attempt to protect the stolen funds keeping his mansion afloat, had just handed me federal leverage. Extortion is defined as obtaining something of value through the use of threats, intimidation, or false claims. By demanding a signed legal document to secure a multi-million-dollar divorce settlement under the specific threat of destroying my career and professional license, he had crossed a massive legal boundary. The fact that he demanded I take the blame for the exact amount of money he and Brittany had actively embezzled only sweetened the trap. I exported the audio file of our conversation. I sent one copy to my personal drive and another directly to Oliver. I added a brief message. My father just demanded a false confession under threat of professional ruin. We now have solid proof of extortion to add to the tax fraud files. I gathered my things and headed to the office feeling an unprecedented level of control. The recorded threat from my father was securely logged and legally preserved. My workplace, a prestigious financial firm located in a towering glass building in the heart of the Chicago financial district, was a fortress of professionalism. We handled billions of dollars in corporate assets, and our reputation for absolute discretion and rigorous ethical standards was our most valuable commodity. I scanned my badge, walked through the polished steel security turnstiles, and took the elevator to the forensics department. The morning proceeded smoothly as I reviewed case files and authorized routine compliance audits. I assumed my father was simply waiting for me to receive his extortionate courier package. I did not expect my mother and sister to launch a simultaneous physical offensive. At exactly 10:30, my desk phone chimed. It was the head receptionist from the main lobby downstairs. Her voice sounded tight and strained, a rare departure from her normally unflappable demeanor. "Natalie, we have a highly unusual situation at the front desk," she whispered urgently. "Two women claiming to be your mother and sister are here. They are extremely agitated and are flatly refusing to leave the premises. They are loudly demanding to speak directly with the managing director. They claim you are currently engaged in corporate espionage and malicious document forgery." My pulse remained completely steady. The coordinated attack was entirely predictable. While Richard tried to extort me behind closed doors, Catherine and Brittany were deployed to publicly humiliate me at my place of employment. They wanted to create a spectacle so disruptive that the firm would terminate me simply to avoid the public relations nightmare. "Please notify security to stand by," I told the receptionist calmly. "I will be right down." I stepped out of my office and walked toward the glass atrium elevators. I did not rush. Panic is exactly what they wanted to provoke. Instead, I took a deep breath, centering my focus on the undeniable facts I held. I rode the elevator down to the mezzanine level, which offered a perfect vantage point overlooking the expansive marble-floored main lobby. I stopped by the thick glass railing and looked down at the scene unfolding below. My mother and sister were standing squarely in the center of the reception area, intentionally blocking the path of incoming high-net-worth clients and senior partners. They were dressed in impeccable designer clothing, perfectly styled to look like affluent, respectable women who were suffering through an unimaginable family tragedy. It was a calculated wardrobe choice designed to lend immediate credibility to their impending performance. My mother was clutching a tissue, dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes while speaking animatedly to the head of building security. Her voice carried clearly, intentionally pitched to echo off the high glass walls, so every passing executive could hear her fabricated grief. "You have to understand the immense legal danger your firm is currently in," my mother wailed, placing a dramatic hand over her heart. "My eldest daughter is deeply unwell and entirely unstable. She is using your corporate databases and proprietary accounting software to forge financial documents. She is trying to ruin her sister out of pure, unadulterated spite. We are here to warn your upper management before she completely destroys your pristine company reputation." Brittany stood slightly behind her, playing the role of the terrified, victimized younger sister to absolute perfection. She wrapped her arms tightly around herself, looking around the bustling lobby with wide, fearful eyes. "She has always been deeply jealous of me," Brittany added, her voice shaking with manufactured trauma. "Now she is actually manufacturing fake offshore accounts to destroy my marriage and my business. She is a rogue employee. You absolutely cannot trust her with sensitive client data. She is vindictive, disturbed, and completely out of control. We just want to help her get the psychiatric care she desperately needs before she commits a federal crime on your watch." I leaned against the glass railing, watching their theatrical display with absolute cold detachment. It was a brilliant, albeit desperate strategy. In the high-stakes world of corporate finance, the mere accusation of an employee forging financial documents or demonstrating mental instability was usually more than enough to trigger an immediate administrative suspension. Financial firms thrive on stability, predictability, and unwavering trust. A screaming family member in the corporate lobby claiming a forensic accountant is fabricating evidence is a nuclear-level threat to that trust. They were betting that my managing director, Mr. Bradley, would fire me on the spot just to contain the brewing scandal, thus neutralizing the devastating audit I had performed for DeAndre. They truly thought this public ambush would force my hand, leaving me unemployed, discredited, and utterly defeated. The security director stepped forward politely, asking them to lower their voices, and offering to escort them to a private waiting room away from the client-facing areas. My mother immediately escalated her volume outright, refusing to be sequestered. "We will not be hidden away in some back room," she shouted indignantly, waving her designer handbag. "We demand to see the managing director immediately. We will not leave this lobby until he knows exactly what kind of malicious, dangerous criminal he is harboring in his accounting department. You need to fire her before she ruins you all." At that exact moment, the private executive elevator chimed loudly, echoing through the cavernous space. The polished steel doors slid open, and Mr. Bradley, the managing director of the entire Chicago branch, stepped out into the chaotic lobby. He was a man who tolerated absolutely no nonsense in his building. He took one look at the screaming women and the surrounding crowd of whispering employees. The corporate ambush was fully set. I smoothed my blazer, walked calmly toward the grand staircase, and prepared to meet them face to face. The absolute destruction of their pathetic little illusion began right now. The heels of my shoes clicked rhythmically against the marble steps as I descended the grand staircase into the main lobby. The entire atrium was completely silent, save for the ambient hum of the building ventilation. Dozens of employees, security guards, and high-net-worth clients stood frozen watching the spectacle. Mr. Bradley, the managing director of our Chicago branch, stood a few feet away from my mother and sister. He was a tall, imposing figure with silver hair and a tailored charcoal suit that screamed executive authority. He possessed a legendary reputation for zero tolerance when it came to corporate disruptions. Catherine and Brittany saw him approaching and immediately adjusted their postures. They straightened their designer jackets and arranged their faces into masks of profound, aristocratic distress. They genuinely believed they were about to witness my spectacular professional execution. "Oh, thank heavens, someone in authority is finally here," my mother gasped, stepping forward to intercept Mr. Bradley. She reached out a manicured hand, expecting him to take it in a gesture of corporate sympathy. "You must be the director. I am Catherine Adams. I am so incredibly sorry to bring this family tragedy to your pristine lobby, but we had absolutely no other choice. My daughter Natalie works in your forensics department. She is having a severe mental breakdown and is actively forging financial documents using your proprietary systems. She is a massive liability to your firm." Mr. Bradley did not take her hand. He stopped 2 feet away, interlacing his fingers in front of him. He looked at my mother with the kind of clinical, detached scrutiny a scientist might reserve for a particularly unpleasant insect. He then shifted his gaze to Brittany, who was clutching her expensive handbag and nodding vigorously in agreement with our mother's fabricated story. "I am fully aware of who you are, Mrs. Adams," Mr. Bradley said. His voice was incredibly calm, yet it carried a resonant authority that commanded absolute attention from everyone in the lobby. "And I am entirely familiar with your other daughter, Brittany." Brittany let out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief. "Then you understand the grave danger she poses," Brittany chimed in, her voice trembling with fake anxiety. "Natalie is deeply unwell. She is trying to destroy my marriage by manufacturing fake offshore accounts. She needs to be terminated immediately and escorted from the premises before she ruins your corporate reputation." I reached the bottom of the staircase and stood silently a few paces behind Mr. Bradley. Neither my mother nor my sister had noticed me yet. They were too entirely focused on their performance. Mr. Bradley let their accusations hang in the crisp air of the lobby for a long, agonizing moment. He turned his head slightly, acknowledging my presence with a subtle nod, before returning his piercing gray eyes to my mother. Mrs. Adams. Mr. Bradley began, a cold, razor-sharp smile forming on his lips. Natalie is not a liability. She is our top anti-money laundering specialist and our most senior forensic auditor. She possesses a flawless record of ethical compliance and corporate integrity. My mother's fake smile faltered. She blinked rapidly, clearly struggling to comprehend why the managing director was praising the employee she had just character assassinated. I do not think you understand the severity of what she is doing behind your back. Catherine argued, her voice losing its previously confident edge. I understand the situation with crystal clarity, Mr. Bradley countered, his tone turning to pure ice. In fact, Natalie proactively submitted your family's entire financial dossier to our legal and compliance departments late last week. She did this precisely to ensure total transparency and to head off any potential conflicts of interest. We have already reviewed the unredacted ledgers. Brittany visibly recoiled. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale beneath her expensive makeup. You reviewed them? Brittany stammered, her voice suddenly shrinking to a fearful whisper. We reviewed every single transaction, Mr. Bradley confirmed, stepping closer to them. We verified the fraudulent disbursements. We tracked the Delaware shell companies you established. We traced the offshore routing numbers through the Cayman Islands. We know exactly how you embezzled $450,000 from your husband's real estate development firm, and we know exactly how you funneled that stolen capital into your parents' domestic trust to pay off their federal tax liens. The silence in the lobby became absolutely deafening. My mother took a staggering step backward, her hand flying to her mouth in genuine horror. She looked around wildly, suddenly hyper-aware of the dozens of affluent clients and financial executives listening to the managing director loudly broadcast her family's criminal tax evasion. This is slander! Catherine shrieked, her voice cracking in pure panic. You are lying. Natalie fabricated those numbers and brainwashed you. We will sue this firm for everything it is worth. Mr. Bradley let out a dry, humorless laugh. You are in absolutely no position to sue anyone, Mrs. Adams. You are currently standing in the lobby of a federally regulated financial institution confessing to receiving stolen property. My legal team has already authenticated the audit. The evidence is entirely irrefutable. He checked the heavy gold watch on his wrist, his expression hardening into pure granite. You came into my building to orchestrate a malicious, coordinated smear campaign against my best auditor. You attempted to manipulate my firm into firing her to cover up your own financial crimes. I find your presence here highly offensive and legally precarious. Leave my building in 10 seconds, or I will have security arrest you for corporate trespassing. Mr. Bradley stated, his voice booming. I will personally hand you over to the police. Brittany was shaking violently. She grabbed our mother's arm, pulling at the sleeve of her designer jacket. Mom, we need to leave right now, Brittany pleaded, her eyes darting toward the security guards who were slowly closing in closely around them. They scurried toward the revolving glass doors like frightened animals fleeing a predator. My mother did not look back. Brittany kept her head down, desperately trying to hide her face from the murmuring crowd. The security guards escorted them entirely off the property, ensuring their humiliation was perfectly visible to the financial district. I stood beside Mr. Bradley for a moment, thanking him for his unwavering support. He simply nodded, telling me to get back to work and finish dismantling the people who tried to manipulate his firm. I returned to my office, my mind already shifting to the next critical phase of the operation. The public ambush had failed miserably. Now they would undoubtedly rely on their greed. 2 weeks passed in a tense, expectant silence. DeAndre officially filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences to keep the initial filings out of the tabloid headlines. We needed them to feel safe enough to walk into our trap. That brought us to a sterile, soundproof mediation room located in a high-rise office building across the city. The rectangular conference table was wide and intimidating. DeAndre sat on one side, exuding a quiet, composed strength. Oliver sat to his right, reviewing legal briefs. I sat to DeAndre's left, officially serving as his retained financial consultant. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the Adams family made their grand entrance. Brittany walked in first, flanked heavily by our father and mother. They were accompanied by a remarkably expensive divorce attorney, a man known for securing massive settlements through aggressive intimidation tactics. Despite the absolute disaster at my corporate office, my family had somehow convinced themselves they still held the upper hand. They operated under the profound delusion that DeAndre would pay any price to prevent his investors from learning about the embezzlement or the infidelity. They mistook his strategic silence for weakness. Brittany took the seat directly across from DeAndre. She wore a tailored white suit portraying the image of a pure, wronged wife. My father sat next to her, puffing out his chest, attempting to physically dominate the room. My mother refused to even look in my direction, opting instead to glare at DeAndre with an expression of aristocratic entitlement. The appointed mediator, a retired judge with a calm demeanor, initiated the proceedings. He explained that mediation was an opportunity to dissolve the marital assets amicably, avoiding a protracted and highly public trial. Brittany's lawyer did not waste a single second. He opened his leather binder and immediately went on the offensive. My client is prepared to walk away quietly and sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Her lawyer stated, his voice ringing with unearned confidence. She will not speak to the press. She will not disclose any internal business operations to your corporate rivals. In exchange for this absolute discretion, we have outlined a very specific and non-negotiable list of settlement demands. Oliver folded his hands together tightly. Let us hear them. First, my client requires spousal support, commensurate with the lifestyle she has grown accustomed to maintaining. Her lawyer announced, we are demanding $20,000 a month in permanent alimony. Second, she will retain full and exclusive ownership of the downtown penthouse, free and clear of any encumbrances. DeAndre will assume responsibility for the remaining mortgage balance on that specific property. I watched DeAndre carefully. He did not flinch. He did not react. He played the part of a cornered billionaire perfectly. My father leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the conference table. You have the money, DeAndre Richards said, his tone dripping with condescension. You are a very wealthy man. You can easily afford to keep my daughter comfortable. Pay the alimony, give her the penthouse, and we can all walk out of this room today without the media getting involved in your messy personal life. Brittany then raised her hand, silencing her own lawyer. There is one more thing, she said, her eyes locking onto DeAndre's face. I want Apex Holdings. Oliver raised an eyebrow, feigning mild surprise. Apex Holdings is a minor limited liability company, Oliver replied smoothly. It is not even a primary revenue-generating asset. Why would you want a secondary corporate shell? Because I know what you hide in there, Brittany stated, a smug, victorious smile spreading across her face. Brittany leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying what she believed was her moment of absolute triumph. She looked at me, then back to DeAndre. You thought I was just a naive wife spending her days at the spa. But I paid attention. I saw the internal transfers. I saw the capital routing. You have been funneling massive amounts of liquid assets into Apex Holdings for the past 3 years. You use it as your personal treasure chest, completely separate from your main development firm. I want 100% ownership of Apex Holdings, or I walk away from this table and take you to a very public, very dirty trial. I kept my face completely blank, masking the surge of adrenaline rushing through my veins. Brittany had indeed been snooping through DeAndre's home office. She had seen ledgers showing millions of dollars moving into Apex Holdings. Her greed had completely blinded her to basic financial due diligence. She saw huge numbers and immediately assumed it meant cash reserves. She assumed DeAndre was hiding wealth from her, and she wanted to steal it right out from under him. My mother smiled proudly at Brittany. You cannot hide your assets from us, DeAndre. My daughter is much smarter than you ever realized. She deserves that company. Give her the holding company, my father demanded aggressively, tapping his finger against the table. You give her the penthouse, the $20,000 a month, and Apex Holdings. In return, you get to keep your main business intact and your reputation clean. That is our final offer. If you refuse, we go to the press tomorrow. We will ruin you. The room hung in a heavy silence following my father's ultimatum. DeAndre lowered his gaze to the polished mahogany table, executing the performance we had meticulously rehearsed for hours in Oliver's office. He allowed his broad shoulders to slump, exhaling a ragged breath that echoed loudly in the quiet room. He ran a hand over his face, masking his features, projecting the exact image of a powerful man who realized he was completely cornered by his own secrets. Brittany, you cannot ask for Apex Holdings, DeAndre said, his voice carrying a perfectly calibrated tremor of desperation. I built my primary development firm with public investors, but Apex is mine. It is my private safety net. I need that holding company to protect myself against market fluctuations. You already demanded the downtown penthouse and a massive monthly alimony payment. Taking Apex is taking away my absolute security. You are leaving me entirely exposed. Brittany leaned across the table, her eyes wide with unadulterated greed. Her white suit contrasted sharply with the dark, predatory expression twisting her features. That is exactly why I want it, DeAndre, she said, her voice dripping with venom. You thought you could hide personal wealth in a shell company while I played the dutiful wife at corporate galas. I know there are millions locked up in those accounts. I saw the transfer ledgers on your desk last month. You will sign over 100% of the membership interest in Apex Holdings right now, or I promise you every local news outlet will have a detailed story about your marital failures and hidden assets by tomorrow morning. My father, Richard, let out a booming, arrogant laugh that reverberated off the soundproof walls. He sat back in his chair, crossing his arms, thoroughly enjoying what he perceived as supreme victory. You really thought you were smarter than us, DeAndre, my father mocked. You came from nothing, built a little real estate portfolio, and suddenly believed you could outplay a family that navigated high society for generations. You are nothing but a fool who got outplayed by a woman. You should have known better than to underestimate an Adams. Pay the price and maybe you can salvage whatever is left of your fragile little reputation. My mother, Catherine, chimed in with her signature brand of aristocratic disdain. She looked at DeAndre as if he were a stain. We welcomed you into our home, she stated with pure hypocrisy. We elevated your status with our family name. And how do you repay us? By forcing my daughter into a stressful divorce. Frankly, handing over Apex Holdings is the absolute least you can do to compensate Brittany for the best years of her life. You are getting off incredibly easy considering the damage you have caused. Oliver, playing the role of frustrated legal counsel, slammed his hands flat against the table. This is blatant extortion, Oliver snapped, glaring at Brittany's high-priced attorney. Your client is making demands that far exceed any reasonable division of marital property. Apex Holdings is a distinct corporate entity. We are prepared to take this before a judge and let the court decide how assets should be equitably divided. Brittany's attorney smiled, adjusting his expensive silk tie. My client is well within her rights to demand a larger share of the estate for absolute confidentiality, he replied. If your client wishes to litigate in a public courtroom, we will air out every dirty detail of this marriage. But considering Mr. DeAndre's development deals rely on his pristine public image, I suggest you advise him to sign. The choice is yours, gentlemen. Sign the company over, or prepare for a media circus. DeAndre looked at me, conveying a look of deep manufactured panic. I kept my face rigid, giving him a slow, reluctant nod, as if confirming that he had no other viable financial option. I acted like the defeated forensic accountant who knew the numbers could not save him from a public relations disaster. Fine, DeAndre whispered, his voice sounding hollowed out. He looked at Brittany, his eyes filled with fake resentment. You win, Brittany. You can have the penthouse, the alimony, and Apex Holdings. Just take it all and leave my primary development firm alone. I want a clean break. I never want to see you or your parents ever again. Oliver sighed, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a stack of corporate transfer documents and operating agreements. He slid them across the table toward Brittany's attorney. These are the transfer documents for Apex Holdings, LLC, Oliver explained. They grant your client 100% ownership, full executive control, and complete assumption of all associated corporate liabilities. Review them. Brittany's lawyer eagerly grabbed the paperwork, flipping through the pages to verify the transfer language. He nodded at Brittany, confirming everything was in order. Brittany practically snatched the pen from her lawyer's hand. She signed her name on the dotted lines with rapid, excited strokes. Oliver then slid a separate stack of papers toward DeAndre. DeAndre held his pen above the signature line, his hand trembling just enough to sell the performance. He closed his eyes for a brief second, took a deep breath, and signed his name, officially relinquishing the company to his treacherous wife. My family erupted into quiet, triumphant murmurs. My mother patted Brittany's shoulder affectionately. My father beamed with pride, looking at DeAndre with absolute contempt. They stood up from the table, gathering their belongings with swift, energetic movements. "Enjoy the holding company," Brittany, DeAndre said, staring at the table. "Oh, I absolutely will," she laughed, turning her back on him. "Come on, Mom and Dad. We have a lot of celebrating to do tonight." They walked out of the mediation room, leaving the heavy oak doors open behind them. They strutted down the hallway, voices echoing with arrogant laughter. They thought they secured a massive hidden fortune. They had no idea what they had actually done. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, sealing the conference room completely. For 10 long seconds, none of us moved an inch. We listened closely to the fading sound of my family's arrogant laughter echoing loudly down the corridor. Once the elevator dinged in the distance, indicating they had finally left the floor, the suffocating tension in the room instantly evaporated. DeAndre dropped his broad shoulders, let out a booming laugh, and leaned back in his leather chair. Oliver tossed his silver pen onto the polished mahogany table, a wide grin breaking across his usually stoic face. I closed my laptop and allowed myself a genuine smile of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. The performance was absolutely flawless. They took the bait entirely without hesitation. That was definitely worthy of an Academy Award. DeAndre chuckled, loosening his silk tie and pouring himself a fresh glass of water. "I honestly thought your father was going to pop a blood vessel when he leaned over the table. The sheer entitlement was almost hard to stomach. But watching Brittany aggressively snatch that pen to sign the transfer documents made every single second of that charade completely worth it." Oliver gathered the signed contracts and placed them securely into his leather briefcase. Her divorce lawyer did not even bother to look past the first page of the operating agreement, Oliver noted, shaking his head at the blatant legal malpractice. He saw the name of the limited liability company, saw the transfer of total executive control, and incorrectly assumed he had just secured a massive hidden fortune for his client. He never bothered to actually check the official balance sheets or the corporate schedule of assets. If he had done basic due diligence, he would have immediately realized he just handed his greedy client a ticking financial time bomb. I proudly stood up and walked over to the large whiteboard at the end of the room, ready to accurately map out the harsh reality of what just happened. "My younger sister has spent her entire life judging books strictly by their covers," I said, picking up a black dry erase marker. "She saw the massive transfer ledgers sitting on your desk, DeAndre. She saw millions of dollars actively moving into Apex Holdings over the past 3 years. Because she possesses absolute zero financial literacy, she immediately assumed you were hoarding liquid cash in a secret offshore treasure chest secretly. She saw large numbers, and her immense greed completely blinded her to the real truth." I drew a large square on the whiteboard and wrote Apex Holdings directly inside it. I then drew a giant 0 right next to the corporate name. "Apex Holdings contains absolutely zero liquid cash," I explained aloud, clarifying the brilliant trap for the room. "It does not hold mutual funds. It does not hold lucrative stock options. It does not hold accessible liquid capital. Apex Holdings is simply a registered debt purchasing entity. It is a corporate shell specifically designed to buy toxic non-performing loans from major financial banks for pennies on the dollar. DeAndre smiled broadly, his dark eyes gleaming with calculated brilliance. When I originally realized Brittany was actively embezzling from my development firm to secretly bail out your parents, I knew I needed to quickly secure overwhelming financial leverage, he said. I knew your parents were actively drowning in massive federal tax liens, but I also knew their primary residential mortgage was massively underwater. They had recklessly taken out multiple home equity lines of credit to endlessly fund their fake country club lifestyle. They missed 6 consecutive monthly mortgage payments. The National Bank was quietly preparing to rapidly initiate aggressive foreclosure proceedings on their sprawling suburban mansion. Oliver pointed a firm finger directly at the whiteboard. Traditional banks absolutely hate the public relations nightmare of foreclosing on high-profile suburban residential properties, Oliver explained smoothly. They greatly prefer to quietly offload the bad debt to third-party collection agencies or private real estate holding firms to instantly clear their internal accounting books. So DeAndre legally authorized Apex Holdings to quietly step in. Apex successfully purchased the defaulted mortgage note on Richard and Catherine Adams' mansion directly from the bank. I quickly drew a thick arrow from Apex Holdings to a smaller box clearly labeled Mansion Mortgage. That specifically means DeAndre did not just save their huge house from the bank, I stated firmly. He literally became the bank. Apex Holdings currently holds the exclusive financial note on my parents' suburban property. They currently owe Apex Holdings over $2 million in principal debt, compounding annual interest and escalating late fees. But we absolutely did not stop there, DeAndre added, crossing his strong arms. Brittany falsely thought she was running a highly successful and profitable luxury lifestyle retail boutique downtown. The harsh reality is that her upscale store has been massively bleeding money for 2 straight years. The only real reason it stayed open was because she was illegally using my stolen capital to heavily subsidize her massive monthly operating losses. Her commercial property lease in the downtown shopping district was extraordinarily expensive, and she had already defaulted on several strict financial covenants within the binding lease agreement. The angry property management group desperately wanted her out. I drew a second black arrow on the whiteboard pointing directly to a new box clearly labeled Boutique Lease. So Apex Holdings swooped in once again, I continued. Apex successfully negotiated a total financial buyout of the commercial property lease directly from the management group. Apex Holdings is now the official legal landlord of Brittany's failing retail boutique. She currently owes Apex hundreds of thousands of dollars in commercial rent arrears, building maintenance fees, and severe financial penalty charges. Those 2 highly toxic debts currently represent the absolute entirety of the Apex Holdings corporate portfolio, Oliver said, leaning forward, resting elbows on the table. Brittany just legally assumed total ownership of millions in pure debt, effectively sealing her own impending absolute financial ruin today. To fully appreciate the absolute brilliance of this legal maneuver, we need to examine exactly what happens when a person assumes total ownership of a corporate entity like Apex Holdings. When Brittany snatched that silver pen and aggressively scribbled her signature across the transfer documents, she did not just inherit a company name. She legally bound herself to the entire operating agreement. She became the sole managing member. In the realm of corporate law, that specific title carries massive weight and terrifying responsibility. Oliver had drafted the paperwork with surgical precision. Buried within the standard boilerplate language of the transfer was a clause stating that the new managing member assumes all existing corporate liabilities and personal guarantees associated with the holding company. Apex Holdings did not purchase the defaulted mortgage on my parents' suburban mansion using free cash. Apex Holdings acquired that toxic debt by securing a highly leveraged corporate loan from a primary financial institution. DeAndre had quietly facilitated that initial loan, using his pristine credit But the transfer documents legally reassign the guarantor status directly to Brittany. She is now personally on the hook for millions of dollars in borrowed capital. Apex Holdings must make massive monthly debt service payments to the original lenders. The only way Apex Holdings can possibly generate the revenue to make those payments is by aggressively collecting the money it is owed. And the only people who owe money to Apex Holdings are Richard Adams, Catherine Adams, and Brittany herself. Oliver stood up and walked over to the whiteboard, joining me. He tapped his finger against the box labeled Mansion Mortgage. "Here is the true genius of the trap," Oliver explained, his voice echoing with profound satisfaction. "Brittany is now officially the ruthless creditor holding the note on her parents' home. She is literally their mortgage lender. We know for an absolute fact that Richard and Catherine are completely broke. They have not made a legitimate mortgage payment in over 6 months. Next week, the first billing cycle under Brittany's new ownership will trigger. Apex Holdings will automatically send a massive past-due mortgage bill to the Adams family mansion." "They will not be able to pay it," I said, picturing the panic that would inevitably wash over my parents' faces. "They will call Brittany and ask her to forgive the debt or give them an extension. After all, she is their golden child, and she supposedly has millions in liquid cash." "But she cannot forgive the debt," DeAndre interjected, a dark smile playing on his lips. "Because if she forgives their debt, Apex Holdings will not have the capital required to pay its own institutional lenders. If Apex defaults, the lenders will immediately pierce the corporate veil and go directly after Brittany's personal assets. They will seize the downtown penthouse she just fought so hard to win in the divorce settlement. They will garnish her $20,000 a month alimony payments." Oliver nodded in agreement. "Exactly. As the sole managing member of Apex Holdings, Brittany has a strict fiduciary and legal obligation to act in the best financial interest of the company. When her parents inevitably fail to make their mortgage payment, she will be legally forced to initiate aggressive collection tactics against her own mother and father. If they cannot produce the money, Brittany will have absolutely no choice but to file formal eviction notices and foreclose on the house she grew up in. She has to render her own parents completely homeless, or she will face total personal bankruptcy. It is the ultimate paradox," I added, feeling a deep sense of poetic justice. "She stole $450,000 to save their house and maintain their fake wealthy image. Now her greed has trapped her into becoming the exact mechanism that will destroy them. She has to become the villain to save herself. And the trap closes even tighter when we look at the commercial real estate side." Oliver continued, moving his finger to the box labeled Boutique Lease. "Apex Holdings bought out the commercial lease for her failing retail store. This means Brittany, the boutique owner, now pays rent directly to Brittany, the owner of Apex Holdings. But her retail store operates at a massive monthly deficit. It generates no real profit. She can no longer use DeAndre's stolen money to subsidize her failing business. So how does she pay the rent?" I asked, already knowing the beautiful answer. "She cannot," DeAndre stated flatly. "Her boutique will immediately default on its commercial lease payments to Apex Holdings. Since Apex relies on that rental income to satisfy its own leveraged debt, Brittany, the landlord, will be legally forced to evict Brittany, the tenant. She has to lock the doors on her own vanity project and liquidate the inventory just to keep the holding company afloat for another month. She is trapped in a financial vice of her own making, and every single move she makes will only crush her further." I looked at the whiteboard, mapping out the absolute destruction of my toxic family. They had spent my entire life caring only about money, status, and appearances. They had sacrificed my college education, my emotional well-being, and my place in the family, simply to protect their fragile egos and their suburban country club facade. They threw me out into the freezing rain because I threatened to expose the truth behind their stolen luxury. Now they were about to tear each other apart. When my parents realized that their beloved golden child is the one holding the foreclosure documents, they will turn on her instantly. All that unconditional love they supposedly felt for her will evaporate the second she threatens their physical comfort. They will demand she liquidate her divorce settlement to save their mansion. They will demand she sell the penthouse and surrender her alimony to protect them. But Brittany is inherently selfish, I noted, picturing her greedy face at the mediation table. She will never comply. She will never comply. She will protect her own comfort while they drown in the very same debt they created. We finalized the strategy in Oliver's office and agreed to wait out the mandatory legal grace period before initiating the asset seizures. In the meantime, my family decided to do exactly what I knew they would do. They threw a huge party. Not just a small gathering, but an extravagant catered affair at the suburban mansion to celebrate what they perceived as Brittany's ultimate victory over DeAndre. I knew all about the event, because my mother could not resist turning it into a public spectacle. She posted the digital invitations across her social media accounts. The sheer hypocrisy of throwing a lavish backyard gala while secretly defaulting on their mortgage was a perfect encapsulation of their entire existence. They were funding a celebration of their own financial execution using high-interest credit cards that were already maxed out to their absolute limits. The Addams family mansion was transformed into a playground for the local suburban elite. Through the network of mutual acquaintances and the inescapable reach of country club gossip, I knew exactly what was unfolding on that meticulously manicured lawn. My parents had hired a professional event planner to construct a massive white tent in the backyard, complete with crystal chandeliers hanging from the fabric ceiling. A string quartet played classical arrangements of modern pop songs near a towering ice sculpture. Waiters in crisp white uniforms navigated through the crowd, carrying heavy silver trays loaded with imported caviar and oysters. A massive champagne tower served as the centerpiece of the patio, where bottles of vintage Dom Perignon flowed freely. Every single drop of that champagne, every single appetizer, and every single note played by the musicians was purchased on borrowed time and borrowed money. They were essentially celebrating on the deck of the Titanic while actively drilling more holes into the hull. The guest list was a who is who of the local country club scene. The same judgmental PTA mothers and arrogant real estate brokers who had flooded my mother's Facebook post with toxic comments were now standing on my parents' patio, drinking their free alcohol. They wore their finest weekend attire, displaying bright fake smiles while exchanging hollow compliments. It was a gathering of pure, unfiltered vanity. My father Richard was holding court near the expensive outdoor kitchen. He puffed out his chest, loudly boasting about how they had completely outsmarted a highly successful real estate developer. He told anyone who would listen that his brilliant daughter had taken her ex-husband to the absolute cleaners. He bragged about the downtown penthouse and the $20,000 monthly alimony payments. He spoke with the arrogant certainty of a man who believed he was entirely untouchable. He had no idea that the scotch he was drinking was going to be one of the last luxuries he would ever taste. Across the yard, my mother Catherine was operating in her prime element. She told her tennis partners that DeAndre had been hiding vast amounts of wealth, but that her family was simply too shrewd to be fooled. She proudly announced that Brittany was now the sole owner of a major corporate holding company. Catherine spoke the words Apex Holdings with profound reverence, treating the name like a royal title rather than the financial death sentence it actually was. And then there was Brittany. She was the absolute center of attention and the star of her own fabricated reality show. She wore a stunning emerald green designer dress that hugged her figure perfectly, looking the part of the triumphant divorcee. She laughed loudly, tossing her hair back dramatically as she recounted the mediation meeting. She described DeAndre as weak and easily manipulated, claiming she had cornered him into surrendering his most valuable private corporation. I forced him to hand over everything, Brittany boasted, taking a long sip from her crystal flute. He thought he could hide his millions from me in a secret shell company. But I saw right through his little game. Now I own Apex Holdings outright. I am the sole managing executive. I own the entire portfolio. Her friends gasped in manufactured awe, praising her business acumen and her undeniable strength. They raised their glasses to toast her new life as a powerful corporate owner. Brittany soaked up the admiration like a sponge, completely unaware that her new company portfolio consisted entirely of her own failing boutique lease and the very mortgage of the house they were currently partying behind. She was literally bragging about owning the chains that were about to bind her. The sheer scale of their collective delusion was breathtaking. They were standing on grass that technically belonged to Brittany due to the defaulted mortgage they could not afford to pay, while celebrating the acquisition of the very debt that would leave them all completely destitute. The string quartet played on. The champagne continued to flow. The laughter echoed across the pristine suburban neighborhood. It was a masterpiece of financial irony. Every smile, every boast, every clinking glass was a testament to their absolute greed and profound ignorance. They had prioritized appearances over reality for so long that they no longer knew the difference between a golden ticket and a poison pill. They felt entirely invincible. They felt they had successfully eliminated the only person who knew their dark secrets when they kicked me out into the rain. But I was definitely not gone, and I was paying close attention. I was simply waiting for the perfect moment to shatter their glass house. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting a golden glow over their hypocritical celebration, I decided it was time to make an appearance. I did not need an invitation to enter a property that was currently owned by a holding company I had weaponized. I calmly prepared to deliver a sudden harsh reality check they would absolutely never, ever forget. I parked my sleek black sedan halfway down the tree-lined street to avoid the cluster of luxury vehicles blocking my parents' driveway. The evening air was cool and crisp against my face as I walked toward the property. The sound of the string quartet drifted over the tall, manicured hedges, playing a pretentious classical rendition of a pop song. Laughter and the clinking of expensive crystal glasses punctuated the music. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer and dark slacks, projecting the absolute professionalism of a woman who dealt with hostile corporate takeovers for a living. I did not look like a woman returning to beg for forgiveness. I looked like an auditor arriving to shut down a corrupt branch. I bypassed the front door and walked directly through the wrought iron side gate leading to the backyard patio. The sheer scale of their financial delusion hit me immediately. The massive white tent glowed warmly from the chandeliers inside. Waiters circulated with silver trays. I stepped onto the pristine flagstone patio and let my presence register. It did not take long. A woman holding a plate of caviar gasped and nudged her husband. The whispers began spreading instantly like a virus, moving through the affluent crowd. The cellist noticed the sudden shift in the audience and fumbled a note. Within 10 seconds, the entire string quartet ground to a halt, leaving a sudden suffocating silence in their wake. Over 100 guests stopped talking and turned to stare at me. My father Richard was standing near the outdoor bar holding a glass of expensive scotch. When his eyes locked onto me, his face instantly turned a deep shade of crimson. He slammed his glass down on the granite counter so hard, the liquid sloshed over the rim. He stormed across the patio, pushing past his wealthy friends with aggressive force. "What in the hell are you doing here?" Richard bellowed, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the backyard. "You are trespassing on my property. Get out right now before I have the police arrest you and drag you out in handcuffs." I stood my ground, completely unfazed by his manufactured rage. I did not raise my voice. I did not match his frantic energy. "I am not here to crash your pathetic little celebration, Richard," I stated calmly, my voice carrying clearly across the silent patio. "I am here to retrieve stolen personal property. If you want to call the police, I strongly encourage you to do so. I would love to explain to the arriving officers exactly why I am standing here and what financial documents I brought with me." My mother, Catherine, rushed over, her face pale beneath her heavy makeup. She grabbed my father's arm, trying to pull him back. "Richard, do not cause a scene in front of our guests," she hissed through clenched teeth. Then she turned her venomous glare on me. You have completely ruined this evening with your toxic presence. You just could not stand to see your sister happy, could you? Before I could respond, the crowd parted like the Red Sea to let the guest of honor through. Brittany strutted forward in her emerald green designer dress, looking every bit the arrogant antagonist. She was flanked by three of her most sycophantic friends, who glared at me with open disdain. Brittany let out a loud theatrical laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Oh, let her stay," Mom, Brittany announced, waving her hand dismissively. "I want her to see this. I want her to get a good, long look at what real success looks like." She crossed her arms and looked me up and down with absolute contempt. "You are so utterly pathetic, Natalie. You just had to show up uninvited to my victory party because your own life is a miserable, empty void. You will always be the bitter outcast looking through the window at our wealth and our happiness. You lost your mind, you lost your family, and you lost your chance at ever being part of this high society. I just secured the biggest divorce settlement in local history, and I own a massive corporate holding company. And what do you have? A lonely apartment and a boring desk job." I let her finish her little speech. I let the crowd absorb every single word of her arrogant boasting. I looked directly into Brittany's eyes and felt absolutely nothing but cold, clinical pity. "You are celebrating a mirage, Brittany," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. "But I did not come here to discuss your imaginary wealth or your impending financial doom." I turned my attention back to my mother, who was clutching her pearl necklace nervously. "When you threw my luggage into the rain last week, you intentionally held back a small mahogany box from my nightstand. It contained the vintage gold watch that belonged to my late grandmother. It is the only thing she left me, and it has zero monetary value to you. I want it back, right now." Catherine scoffed, trying to regain her superior posture. "I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. You are completely delusional." I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up. "Do not play games with me, Catherine. I have a tracking tag hidden in the lining of that specific box. I know it is sitting inside the top drawer of your master bathroom vanity right this very second. Go upstairs, retrieve my property, and bring it to me immediately. If you refuse, I will walk into that house and retrieve it myself. If you try to stop me, I will have the police escort me inside to recover stolen goods. And while they are here, I might just accidentally drop a folder detailing your offshore tax evasion right onto the patio floor." My mother stared at me in pure horror. She finally realized I held all the cards. She walked quickly upstairs. The silence she left in her wake was thick and suffocating. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between me, Richard, and Brittany. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted meats, a sharp contrast to the ugly reality bleeding into their perfect evening. Richard stood rigid, his hands balled into tight fists at his sides. He desperately wanted to lash out to exert the physical and verbal dominance he had always wielded over me. But the threat of police involvement and public exposure kept him firmly anchored to the flagstone patio. He simply glared, his chest heaving with suppressed rage. Brittany attempted to fill the awkward void with a forced, dismissive laugh. She turned to her sycophantic friends, flipping her perfect hair over her shoulder. "Can you believe the absolute nerve?" Brittany said, her voice overly loud and shrill. "She is so obsessed with a piece of old jewelry that she has to ruin a perfectly good evening. It is honestly just sad. She needs serious psychiatric help." Her friends offered weak, polite murmurs of agreement, but their eyes kept flicking back to me. They were smelling blood in the water. High society thrives on scandal, and a confrontation like this was prime gossip material for the next 6 months. They were memorizing every single detail of this interaction to repeat at their upcoming luncheons. Minutes ticked by. The catering staff stood completely frozen by the buffet tables, unsure if they should continue serving the shrimp canapes. The string quartet members kept their instruments lowered, exchanging nervous glances. I remained perfectly still, my posture relaxed, projecting an aura of complete control. I did not check my phone. I did not fidget. I simply waited. Finally, Catherine reappeared at the sliding glass doors. She hurried across the patio, her heels clicking rapidly on the stone. She thrust the small mahogany box toward my chest, her face a rigid mask of indignation. "Here is your precious little trinket," Catherine hissed, trying to keep her voice low enough that the nearest guests could not hear. "It must have accidentally gotten swept up when we were clearing out your room. Nobody was trying to steal your worthless junk. Now take it and get off our property." I took the box from her shaking hands. I opened the brass clasp and inspected the interior. The vintage gold watch rested safely on the faded velvet cushion. Its delicate face and worn leather strap stood in stark contrast to the flashy diamond-encrusted jewelry dripping from my mother and sister. This watch represented a generation of our family that actually understood the value of hard work and integrity. It did not belong in a house built on fraud and stolen capital. I snapped the box shut and slipped it securely into my blazer pocket. I looked up from my pocket and took a long, sweeping survey of the entire backyard. I took my time letting the weight of my gaze fall upon every lavish detail they had financed with DeAndre's embezzled funds. I looked at the towering ice sculpture slowly melting near the outdoor bar. I looked at the massive white tent with its rented crystal chandeliers swinging gently in the evening breeze. I looked at the tables piled high with imported delicacies and the waiters holding silver trays of vintage champagne. I looked at the people, the fake friends with their fake smiles, the opportunistic neighbors, the country club associates, who would absolutely abandon my parents the very second their bank accounts froze. None of these people cared about Richard, Catherine, or Brittany. They only cared about the free alcohol and the proximity to perceived wealth. It was a spectacular circus of vanity, and I was about to be the one to burn the tent to the ground. My eyes finally settled back on my family. Richard was breathing heavily, waiting for me to leave. Catherine was crossing her arms, attempting to look regal and unbothered. Brittany was smirking, holding a fresh glass of champagne surrounded by her enablers. They truly believed they had won. They truly believed I was just a bitter, defeated accountant making empty threats on my way out the door. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream or throw insults. Instead, I let a genuine, terrifying smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a forensic auditor who had already balanced the ledger and found them completely bankrupt. "Enjoy the champagne tonight," I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the patio with absolute chilling clarity. "Drink every last drop. Celebrate your brilliant legal victories and your massive corporate acquisitions, but savor it, because tomorrow morning you will not even own the grass you are standing on." The words landed like a physical blow. The smirk instantly vanished from Brittany's face, replaced by a flicker of genuine, unadulterated confusion. Richard's jaw went slack. Catherine instinctively took a step backward, her hand flying to her throat. They did not understand the exact mechanics of what I meant, but the absolute certainty in my voice sent a visible shiver down their spines. "You are completely insane," Brittany yelled, her voice pitching up in a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. "You are just making up crazy lies because you are a loser. You have nothing." I did not bother to respond. The trap was already set, the ink was already dry, and their financial execution was fully scheduled. I simply turned my back on them and walked toward the wrought iron side gate. The sea of wealthy guests parted for me silently, their eyes wide with shock and morbid fascination. I walked down the driveway, leaving the oppressive atmosphere of their suburban delusion behind me. As I reached my car and unlocked the doors, I could hear Richard yelling at the string quartet to start playing again. I heard Catherine loudly apologizing to her friends, frantically trying to spin my chilling warning as the ramblings of a jealous, unstable woman. They were desperately trying to glue the pieces of their shattered party back together. I slid into the driver's seat of my sedan, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. I felt a profound sense of peace settling over my mind. I had retrieved the only item in that house that held any real value to me. I had looked my abusers in the eye and promised them their impending doom. The grace period was officially over. Tomorrow morning the emails would be sent, the federal agencies would be notified, and the corporate dominoes would begin to fall. They had exactly 12 hours of blissful ignorance left. I turned on the radio and drove back to Chicago, ready for execution day. Exactly 1 week had passed since my mother slapped me and my father threw my luggage into the freezing rain. 7 days since they legally and emotionally severed me from their lives to protect a fragile suburban illusion built entirely on stolen money. I woke up at 5 in the morning, feeling more rested and clear-headed than I had in years. The sun was just beginning to rise over Lake Michigan, casting a brilliant orange and gold reflection across the rippling water. I stepped out onto the glass-enclosed balcony of my luxury Chicago condo, wrapping a thick wool shawl around my shoulders against the biting morning wind. In one hand, I held a ceramic mug filled with pitch-black coffee. In the other, I carried my encrypted work laptop. Today was execution day. I set the laptop on the small outdoor bistro table and took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The bitter, robust flavor grounded me. Below me, the city was slowly waking up. Delivery trucks navigated the streets and early commuters hurried toward the transit stations. They were all going about their normal, predictable lives, completely unaware of the absolute financial nuclear detonation I was about to trigger. I opened the laptop screen, letting the biometric scanner verify my identity. The desktop illuminated, displaying 3 neatly organized digital folders sitting prominently in the center of the screen. Each folder represented a distinct tactical strike against my family. At precisely 6:00, the secure communication application on my screen chimed. I accepted the incoming video call. The screen split into 2 windows. On the left was DeAndre sitting in his immaculate downtown office. He wore a crisp, white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, projecting the image of a man ready to get his hands dirty. His posture was relaxed, but his dark eyes burned with intense focus. On the right was Oliver sitting at his large mahogany desk at the law firm, flanked by stacks of legal briefs and a steaming cup of tea. He looked as sharp and predatory as ever. "Good morning, Natalie," DeAndre said, his voice rich and steady through the speakers. "I trust you had a restful weekend following your brief appearance at the mansion." "It was highly illuminating," I replied, offering a tight professional smile. They spent the entire weekend celebrating their supposed legal victory. The sheer arrogance was almost difficult to witness. "Let them enjoy their hangovers," Oliver chimed in, adjusting his silver-framed glasses. "They are going to need the rest." The mandatory legal grace period expired at midnight. Brittany is now permanently and irrevocably bound to the Apex Holdings operating agreement. She cannot back out, she cannot reverse the transfer, and she cannot claim ignorance. She is officially the sole managing member and the primary guarantor of all associated corporate debt. The trap is completely locked. I opened the first folder on my desktop, verifying the contents one last time. "The forensic audit is perfectly packaged," I confirmed to the men on the screen. "Every forged invoice, every offshore wire routing number, and every deposit slip leading into my parents' domestic trust is documented. The evidence of the $450,000 embezzlement is absolutely bulletproof. I have attached the corresponding tax statutes that highlight the severe federal violations regarding their unreported income." "Excellent," DeAndre stated, nodding slowly. "I have my civil litigation team standing by. The moment your emails go out, my firm will officially file the lawsuit against Brittany for corporate fraud and theft of company assets. We are suing her for the principal amount plus punitive damages. It will immediately freeze any legitimate personal assets she might still possess." Oliver leaned forward, his expression turning deadly serious. "And the holding company triggers are set. As soon as the system updates this morning, Apex Holdings will automatically generate the default notices. The commercial property management group overseeing Brittany's boutique will receive formal notification that their tenant is in breach of contract. Simultaneously, the bank servicing the mortgage on Richard and Catherine's mansion will receive the automated directive to initiate aggressive collection protocols. Brittany will officially be tasked with foreclosing on her own parents." Everything was perfectly aligned. We had spent weeks orchestrating this exact convergence of legal and financial maneuvers. There were no loose ends, no loopholes, and absolutely no room for them to manipulate their way out of the consequences. They had spent my entire life controlling the narrative, twisting the truth to suit their selfish needs, and burying anyone who threatened their pristine social standing. But you cannot gaslight the Internal Revenue Service. You cannot manipulate a mathematical equation, and you certainly cannot charm your way out of massive legally binding corporate debt. I moved my cursor over the master command icon I had built specifically for this operation. It was an automated script designed to send the 3 separate email packages simultaneously to the respective federal agencies, corporate compliance officers, and financial institutions. Are we absolutely certain about this? Oliver asked, offering one final procedural checkpoint. Once we initiate this sequence, the fallout will be immediate and catastrophic for them. There is no reversing this process. They made their choice when they decided to steal from me, DeAndre said without a trace of hesitation. They doubled down on that choice when they tried to extort Natalie and destroy her career. I am entirely ready. I looked out over the Chicago skyline, feeling the crisp morning air against my face. I thought about the 18-year-old girl whose college savings were stolen for a sports car. I thought about the exhausted accountant who was slapped in the freezing rain. I am ready, I stated firmly, keeping my eyes locked on the screen. Oliver raised his coffee cup in a silent salute. Then let us proceed. On my count. 3, 2, 1. Execute. I clicked the mouse pad. The automated script instantly engaged. The final trap was securely sprung. Done. Done. The single syllable hung in the crisp morning air of my balcony, carrying the weight of absolute finality. I leaned back in my chair and watched the confirmation banners illuminate my computer screen one by one. In the digital realm, a financial nuclear bomb does not produce a mushroom cloud or a deafening roar. It happens in total silence. Data packets flash through fiber optic cables at the speed of light, infiltrating secure servers and triggering automated protocols that permanently alter the course of human lives. The first email package was routed directly to the Internal Revenue Service, specifically targeting the Criminal Investigation Division. This was not a standard tip line submission that might languish in a bureaucratic queue for several months. As a licensed forensic accountant, I utilized a direct priority portal reserved strictly for verified financial professionals reporting highly documented federal crimes. I attached official government documents for reporting suspected corporate tax fraud alongside the unredacted financial ledgers, the offshore routing numbers, and the domestic trust account statements. The narrative I provided to the federal agents was completely irrefutable. Richard and Catherine Adams had knowingly received $450,000 in stolen corporate funds. They deliberately failed to declare this massive influx of capital as taxable income, using it instead to secretly satisfy existing federal tax liens and service a severely delinquent suburban mortgage. In the strict eyes of the federal government, this was not a simple family dispute. It was a highly coordinated, high-level tax evasion scheme and felony money laundering operation. The federal government does not send polite warning letters for financial crimes of this massive magnitude. They freeze personal assets, they seize physical properties, and they quickly dispatch armed agents to knock on front doors long before breakfast. The second digital strike hit the commercial banking sector with equally devastating force. When Brittany arrogantly signed the operating agreement for Apex Holdings during her divorce mediation, she legally assumed the role of sole managing member and primary guarantor for a mountain of highly leveraged corporate debt. My automated script immediately notified the institutional lenders that the holding company had undergone a total change in executive ownership. Because Brittany possessed an abysmal personal credit score, massive outstanding consumer debt, and absolutely no liquid capital to service the commercial loans, the bank risk assessment algorithms reacted instantly. The system registered a critical default risk on her profile. The automated response was entirely ruthless and immediate. The bank quickly exercised its contractual right to issue formal default notices. But it certainly did not stop there. To protect their financial exposure, the institution automatically initiated a hard freeze on all personal and business accounts associated with the new guarantor. In a matter of seconds, Brittany's personal checking accounts, her savings accounts, and the business accounts for her failing downtown retail boutique were entirely locked down. Her debit cards were instantly deactivated by the central system. Her high-limit credit cards, which she completely relied on to continuously fund her extravagant lifestyle, were permanently suspended. The bank officially categorized her as a hostile financial liability. She could not buy a simple cup of coffee, let alone pay the commercial rent she now technically owed to herself through the holding company. The third and final strike was executed simultaneously by Oliver's elite legal team. A comprehensive civil lawsuit was officially filed in the county courthouse listing Brittany as the primary defendant. DeAndre was aggressively suing her for the exact amount of the embezzled funds, plus exorbitant punitive damages for the intentional breach of fiduciary duty, corporate fraud, and malicious theft of company assets. The lawsuit was accompanied by an emergency ex parte motion for a prejudgment writ of attachment. In simple legal terms, DeAndre's legal team asked the judge to immediately freeze any remaining assets Brittany might try to desperately hide or liquidate, including the downtown penthouse she had fought so fiercely to secure during the mediation. The sitting judge presented with my absolutely airtight forensic audit proving her theft would grant the motion without a single moment of hesitation. Professional process servers were already grabbing the freshly stamped court documents, heading out into the city to physically deliver the devastating news. The sheer beauty of this three-pronged attack was its inescapable synergy. If Brittany tried to fight the civil lawsuit by falsely claiming the money was a marital gift, the tax investigation would easily prove she routed it through offshore shell companies to actively hide it from her husband. If my parents tried to claim they did not know the money was stolen, they would still be held strictly liable by the federal government for deliberately failing to pay taxes on nearly $500,000 of undeclared income. And while they frantically scrambled to hire expensive defense attorneys to keep themselves out of federal prison, they would instantly realize that Brittany's frozen bank accounts and the massive unpayable debt generated by Apex Holdings meant they had absolutely no money to pay for legal representation. Their stolen wealth was gone entirely. Their pristine credit was completely destroyed. Their access to liquid cash was evaporated without a trace. I sat on my balcony watching the city traffic slowly increase as the bustling morning progressed. The bright sun climbed higher into the sky, gently warming the cool morning air around me. The digital delivery was completely successful. The secure corporate servers had processed the damning information. The federal agents were undoubtedly opening their investigative files right now. The bank managers were actively reviewing the automated security freezes on the accounts. The process servers were starting their cars to deliver the lawsuits. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my strong black coffee. The trap had successfully closed, shutting out any tiny possibility of escape for my abusive family. All that remained now was waiting for the ultimate destruction. The shockwave was guaranteed to completely obliterate the Addams family forever. I placed my phone down and calmly waited. Absolutely perfect. Exactly 20 minutes passed, in absolute silence on my balcony. The city below continued its morning rush, completely indifferent to the localized earthquake I had triggered. My black coffee had grown cold in its ceramic mug. I felt a profound sense of stillness. For my entire life, my family had dictated the emotional weather. They had generated the storms, the lightning, and the torrential downpours of abuse. Now I was controlling the climate. I was the architect of their disaster, and I was perfectly comfortable in the eye of the storm. The quiet morning was suddenly shattered. My cell phone, resting flat on the glass bistro table, erupted into a violent fit of vibration. The buzzing was so intense that the device began to slowly slide across the smooth glass surface, threatening to fall off the edge. I reached out and trapped the vibrating phone beneath my palm. The screen was a blinding cascade of frantic notifications. It was not just one call, it was a relentless, overlapping barrage of incoming calls, voicemails, and text messages. The digital onslaught reflected the absolute panic currently consuming the Addams family. I unlocked the screen and watched the chaos unfold in real time. My call log showed 15 missed calls from Brittany, 12 from my mother, and 8 from my father, all registered within 3 minutes. They were frantically trying to reach the daughter they had violently discarded just 1 week ago. I did not answer a single call. I simply watched the missed call badges multiply, feeling a deep satisfaction. They were finally experiencing the exact level of helplessness they had inflicted upon me for 33 years. A new text message from Brittany flashed across the top of my screen. The preview displayed a level of terror that made me smile. I opened the message application to read the full text. It was typed in all capital letters, a digital scream for mercy. IRS agents are at my boutique. They have badges and boxes. They are locking the doors and kicking out my customers. Please tell me what is happening. I know you know something about this. Please do not send that email. I read her desperate plea twice. The sheer irony of her words was poetic. She was begging me not to send the email, completely oblivious to the fact that the email was the exact reason federal agents were currently swarming her vanity project. She had spent her adult life playing the untouchable golden child, believing her actions carried zero consequences. Now she was standing in her failing store, watching armed investigators confiscate her forged ledgers and seize her inventory. Her wealthy friends and affluent customers were undoubtedly standing outside, watching the spectacular collapse of her fake empire. Before I could process Brittany's humiliation, another text message arrived from my mother. The tone was a massive departure from the arrogant woman who had slapped me in the freezing rain. The message read, "Natalie, we are losing the house. The bank just called your father and said the mortgage company is initiating immediate foreclosure proceedings. All of our credit cards are declining. We cannot even buy gas. We were wrong about everything. We are so incredibly sorry. Please, you have to stop this. Please give us one chance. We are your family." I stared at my mother's words, analyzing the sheer hypocrisy dripping from every syllable. We were wrong. Please, give us one chance. They did not apologize when they stole my college fund or belittled my career. They certainly did not apologize when they kicked me out of my childhood home and tried to frame me for federal crimes. They were only apologizing now because their bank accounts were frozen and they were about to be physically removed from their suburban castle. They were begging the scapegoat to save them from the slaughterhouse. A third message appeared this time from my father. His text was brief, demanding, and entirely characteristic of a man trying to maintain control of a situation that had already spiraled wildly out of his grasp. "Natalie, we need to talk right now. The police are asking questions about the trust accounts. Come home immediately so we can fix this misunderstanding with the lawyers. Come home." He was ordering me to return to the exact same property he had aggressively banished me from. He wanted me to step back into the role of the obedient, submissive daughter and fix the massive criminal mess he had willingly participated in. He still believed he held authority over me. He still believed I could be manipulated into saving his country club reputation. I sat back in my chair, the cold lake breeze rushing over my balcony. I looked at the 3 text messages stacked on my glowing screen. 3 desperate attempts to reel me back into their toxic orbit. 3 people who had finally realized that the quiet, practical accountant was actually the only thing standing between them and total destruction. They wanted a response. They wanted a negotiation. They wanted a lifeline. I tapped the reply box at the very bottom of the group chat my father had hastily created. I did not write a long emotional paragraph. I did not explain my actions or justify the forensic audit. I did not express any anger, sadness, or vindictive joy. I simply typed 2 words that represented the absolute and permanent end of my relationship with the Addams family. No, never. I hit send. I watched the delivery confirmation appear beneath the text. I did not wait for their inevitable replies. I immediately opened the contact settings on my phone. With 3 deliberate taps, I blocked Brittany's number. I blocked my mother's number. I blocked my father's number. I severed the digital connection, completely destroying their very last remaining hope. The vibrating finally stopped. The screen went dark. The silence returned to my balcony, deeper and more profound than before. It was the beautiful, unbothered silence of total victory. The beautiful, unbothered silence of total victory on my balcony was just the prologue. The 6 months that followed unfolded like a highly accelerated masterclass in federal justice and financial ruin. I watched the spectacular collapse of the Addams family entirely from a distance, receiving periodic updates from DeAndre and Oliver as the legal and federal mechanisms relentlessly ground my abusers into dust. The consequences hit them with the force of a freight train. Within 72 hours of my automated emails, the Internal Revenue Service officially seized the suburban mansion. Federal agents arrived in dark vehicles, placed padlocks on the grand double doors, and plastered seizure notices across the front windows. Richard and Catherine were given exactly 2 hours to pack whatever basic necessities they could carry. The country club immediately revoked their membership, publicly citing character clause violations. My parents' pristine, artificially inflated social standing evaporated instantly. The affluent friends who had happily drank their stolen champagne at the backyard victory party suddenly pretended they had never met them. Without their stolen capital and facing massive federal fines for tax evasion, my parents were forced to relocate to a cramped, deeply unpleasant 2-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. The building possessed flickering fluorescent lights in the hallways, peeling linoleum floors, and a distinct odor of damp decay. It was a brutal, uncompromising reality check for 2 people who had spent their entire lives looking down on the working class. Richard, stripped of his arrogant bravado, spent his days frantically calling public defenders who demanded upfront retainers he simply did not have. Catherine, who once hosted lavish charity luncheons, was now reduced to clipping grocery coupons and arguing with her new landlord about the unreliable hot water. Their spectacular downfall was entirely self-inflicted, the direct result of choosing status over their own daughter. Meanwhile, Brittany's descent into absolute ruin was equally poetic and far more severe. DeAndre's civil lawsuit hit her with the overwhelming force of a tidal wave. Oliver presented the presiding judge with the unredacted forensic audit, the forged invoices, and the offshore routing numbers. The judge did not show an ounce of leniency. The court immediately ordered a complete freezing of Brittany's remaining assets, stripping her of the luxury downtown penthouse she had so smugly demanded during the mediation. The $20,000 monthly alimony was instantly nullified by her documented financial fraud. Furthermore, the trap of Apex Holdings slammed shut exactly as designed. With her personal bank accounts completely frozen and her boutique seized by federal agents, Brittany defaulted heavily on the massive corporate loans she had arrogantly guaranteed. The commercial lenders pierced the corporate veil, holding her personally liable for millions of dollars in highly toxic debt. She was forced into a devastating involuntary Chapter 7 personal bankruptcy. She lost her designer wardrobe, her expensive jewelry, and her luxury vehicle. The illusion of the successful, affluent socialite was shattered beyond repair. The most satisfying element of Brittany's collapse was the immediate departure of her personal trainer lover. The very second her platinum credit cards declined at their favorite upscale hotel, his profound devotion completely vanished. He did not stick around to offer emotional support during her bankruptcy hearings. He packed his gym bags and blocked her number, moving on to his next wealthy target before the bank even repossessed her car. Stripped of her fake wealth, her stolen status, and her superficial romance, Brittany was left entirely alone to face a mountain of court-ordered restitution and compounding legal fees. Because her public reputation was completely destroyed by the highly publicized fraud lawsuit, no respectable corporate entity in the city would even consider hiring her. She possessed absolutely no genuine professional skills, no credible work history, and a resume permanently stained by federal embezzlement. Desperation eventually forced her hand. 5 months after she stood on the patio and mocked my career, Brittany was officially hired to work the overnight shift at a greasy fast food drive-through window located just off the interstate. DeAndre actually drove past the establishment one evening just to verify the incredible reality of her new employment. He called me from his car laughing in sheer disbelief. She was wearing a highly unflattering polyester uniform, a poorly fitting visor, and a headset. She spent her nights handing out cheap hamburgers and saturated French fries to exhausted truck drivers and intoxicated college students. She had to tolerate rude customers screaming at her over missing condiment packets, while her wages were heavily garnished by the state to slowly pay back the massive corporate restitution she owed DeAndre. Every single minimum wage paycheck she earned was instantly sliced in half by the court system. The contrast between her previous life and her current reality was staggering. She used to sip imported champagne in rented tents, complaining about the temperature of her caviar. Now she smelled permanently of cooking grease and industrial floor cleaner. The physical toll of manual labor and extreme financial stress aged her rapidly. The perfectly manicured golden child was completely gone, replaced by an exhausted, bitter woman trapped in a perpetual cycle of minimum wage servitude. She had attempted to destroy my life because she felt entirely entitled to the wealth she actively stole from her husband. Instead, she successfully engineered her own absolute poverty. I did not feel a single drop of sympathy for any of them. They had operated with calculated cruelty for decades, completely insulated from the damage they caused others. They believed their shared DNA gave them the absolute right to abuse me, manipulate me, and ultimately discard me. The federal fines, the bankruptcy hearings, the cramped apartment, and the drive-through window were not excessive punishments. They were the exact correct measurements of karma, balancing a scale that had been tipped in their favor for far too long. The universe had successfully corrected the mathematical error of their existence, and I was the auditor who proudly delivered the final invoice. 1 year later, the crisp autumn air swept through downtown Chicago, carrying the unmistakable scent of roasted turkey and warm spices. I stood in the expansive kitchen of my newly purchased penthouse, overlooking the pristine waters of Lake Michigan. I was no longer the discarded daughter standing in the freezing rain. I was the newly appointed director of forensic accounting at my prestigious financial firm. Mr. Bradley had personally recommended me for the executive promotion, citing my flawless handling of the Addams family embezzlement case as the prime example of my unyielding corporate integrity. I now possessed a massive corner office, a dedicated team of junior auditors, and a highly lucrative compensation package that provided absolute financial security. I had officially built the life my parents always pretended to have, but I had built it entirely on a foundation of truth and relentless hard work. My career was thriving beyond my wildest expectations, but more importantly, my personal life was completely devoid of toxic manipulation. I poured a glass of rich red wine and checked the roasting thermometer in the oven. Today was Thanksgiving. For 33 years, this holiday had been an absolute nightmare of passive-aggressive insults, forced smiles, and bitter comparisons. My mother would inevitably criticize my outfit, my father would complain about the cost of the meal, and Brittany would loudly boast about her latest designer purchase, while expecting me to clear her dirty dishes. But today, the massive dining table in my penthouse was set for only 2 people. The heavy oak door of my condo chimed. I set my wine glass down, smoothed my apron, and walked over to greet my guest. I pulled the door open and smiled warmly. DeAndre stood in the hallway holding a large bakery box filled with fresh artisan pastries and 2 expensive bottles of vintage wine. He looked incredibly relaxed, his face free of the heavy tension that used to define his features during his marriage to my sister. His real estate development firm was experiencing record-breaking profits since he purged the fraudulent elements from his corporate accounts. He wore a comfortable cashmere sweater and a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Happy Thanksgiving," Natalie DeAndre said, stepping into the warm foyer and handing me the bakery box. "It smells absolutely incredible in here." "I am so glad you could make it, DeAndre," I replied, taking the boxes and leading him into the open concept kitchen. "We might not share any DNA, but you are the only family I actually want to spend this holiday with." "That is the beautiful thing about life," DeAndre chuckled, pouring himself a glass of the red wine. "We get to choose our family when the ones we were assigned at birth turn out to be completely defective." We sat down at the large dining table, sharing a massive feast of roasted turkey, garlic, mashed potatoes, and fresh cranberries. There was no tension in the room. There were no hidden agendas, no backhanded compliments, and absolutely no manufactured drama. We simply laughed, shared stories about our recent corporate victories, and enjoyed the profound peace that comes from excelling in life without carrying the dead weight of abusive relatives. DeAndre had become my chosen family. We had forged a bond in the fires of absolute betrayal, and we had emerged completely victorious. He was a true brother to me, a man of integrity and brilliant business acumen who respected my intellect and valued my loyalty. We had successfully protected each other from the greedy clutches of the Addams family, and in doing so, we had created a lifelong alliance. After we finished dinner, we stepped out onto the glass-enclosed balcony to watch the city lights illuminate the dark Chicago sky. The wind was cold, but I felt entirely warm inside. I leaned against the railing, looking out over the sprawling metropolis. I thought about the scared young woman who had been kicked out of her childhood home just 1 year ago. She had felt so incredibly alone, so completely isolated from the world. But she had survived. I took a deep breath of the freezing air and looked directly into the metaphorical camera of my life. There is a deeply ingrained societal expectation that you must unconditionally love and support your blood relatives, I said aloud, letting the words carry into the night. We are constantly told that family is absolutely everything and that blood is inherently thicker than water. We are conditioned to endure endless cycles of emotional abuse, financial exploitation, and psychological manipulation simply because the perpetrators happen to share our genetic code. But that is a complete and utter lie. Sharing DNA with someone does not give them the blanket right to actively abuse you. A biological connection is not a free pass to steal your resources, belittle your accomplishments, or treat you like a disposable asset. Family is supposed to be a safe harbor, not a hostile battleground. If your parents or your siblings are actively destroying your mental health or your financial stability, you have the absolute right to walk away. You have the right to protect yourself using every legal and factual weapon at your disposal. You do not owe your abusers loyalty just because they raised you or grew up in the same house as you. True loyalty is earned through mutual respect, consistent kindness, and unwavering honesty. Do not ever let anyone guilt you into remaining in a toxic environment for the sake of an artificial family image. You are allowed to aggressively cut out the poison. You are allowed to expose their lies to the harsh light of day. You are allowed to let them suffer the brutal natural consequences of their own malicious actions. I survived because I stopped trying to please people who were fundamentally committed to misunderstanding me. I thrived because I embraced the cold, hard facts and used them to completely dismantle the illusion they used to trap me. My name is Natalie, and I am the forensic accountant who audited her own toxic family and successfully balanced the scales of justice. Have you ever had to use the law or hard evidence to protect yourself from your own blood relatives? Share your story in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe for more. The story of Natalie provides a powerful reflection on the true definition of family and the importance of establishing unyielding personal boundaries. Society often perpetuates the harmful myth that biological ties demand unconditional loyalty, regardless of how deeply abusive or exploitative those relationships become. Natalie's journey forcefully dismantles this narrative, proving that shared DNA does not equate to a free pass for mistreatment. One crucial lesson learned is that protecting your peace sometimes requires severing ties with the people who brought you into the world. Her decision to use forensic accounting to systematically dismantle her parents' financial fraud highlights the absolute necessity of confronting toxic behavior with cold, hard facts rather than emotional pleas. Abusers thrive in environments where victims remain silent and compliant, by meticulously documenting their crimes and refusing to be gaslit. Natalie neutralized their power entirely. She realized that trying to reason with individuals who viewed her as a disposable asset was a futile endeavor. True empowerment comes from accepting that you cannot change toxic relatives, but you can definitely control your reaction to them. Furthermore, her Thanksgiving celebration with DeAndre illustrates that family is a dynamic construct built on mutual respect, trust, and genuine support, rather than mere genetics. We possess the autonomy to cultivate a chosen family, composed of individuals who celebrate our achievements and honor our boundaries. Natalie's rebirth is a testament to the incredible strength required to walk away from a destructive past and construct a life anchored in authenticity. You deserve to surround yourself with people who genuinely appreciate your worth and nurture your growth. Do not let obligations tether you to an environment that destroys your mental and financial well-being. Have you ever chosen to walk away from a toxic relative to protect your own peace? Share your story.